and it's about food security and the impacts of climate change and bioenergy. And what I'm going to tell you this morning is that I think that's totally wrong, that in fact we're still not facing what is the real cause of global food insecurity today. But first, I thought it was important, years ago, I walked around a Civil War battlefield with a friend who knew the war very well. He knew it front and backwards. I had no interest. But what he brought to life the fact that blood had been shed on the grass that we were walking on. And it really had an impact. And I thought, you know, maybe where we should start is recalling what happened here, where we're sitting just 30 years ago when Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge didn't just murder people, they had their own agrarian movement. They told the people in the cities, we're short of food, go to the country and make food. And of course what happened instead was they sent people with no implements, with no knowledge, and at least 1.5 million people starved to death. This is the problem when policymakers don't understand agriculture and give the wrong prescription. This is not new though, this is historical. I'm sorry to give you a Western parable. I'm sure there's one here in the East, I just don't know it. But we in the West have what we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In other words, what's going to cause man's demise? And the first horse is that of conquest, which back then meant slavery, which is probably Al Ambrose's taxman, I think. The next horse is war, because war has a cost. It costs you life, it costs you treasure. The third, you can notice, is a very gaunt figure. That's famine. And then finally, the 4th horseman is death. But famine always preceded death. Some reverse it. Some will say, well, famine, and because there was a shortage of food, there was war, because there was an intense fight over food. And I'm going to conclude on a very similar comment here as we move along. The modern day sort of characterization of what causes hunger comes in sort of like three groupings. We have the Thomas Malthus theory that our problem is that we produce too many human beings, too many mouths, and that's why there's a shortage of food. The opposite of that are what we call the cornucopians. And I must admit, I'm an optimist, so you know that just means we need to apply our technology, our know-how better, and we can produce absolutely what Julia said, 18, 20 metric tons per hectare, no problem, just keep it going. There is a third group, and interestingly, Karl Marx actually came up with this. He said that the problem why there's food shortages is because of economic and political failure. And I would suggest there's a lot of truth to that. There's a bit of irony that if we look at policy around the world, sort of contrary to where Karl Marx came from, it's actually in the modern democracies where you have the least likelihood of famine. I thought, well, let's put up the map. Here's the pointer, and just look at where the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, says the hunger is. And you can see it's concentrated here in Africa and Southeast Asia. Basically, 80% of the population that's considered malnourished in the world is in these 2 zones. About 3.5 million people a year, mostly women and children, die of hunger. And what the FAO doesn't really highlight, you have to dig into their data to find out. And we look, they listed 37 countries around the world that are suffering from severe food problems right now. And I went through the list of, well, what were the reasons given? Why is there a food shortage? And yes, you've got a group down here in which weather is listed, but often it wasn't weather alone. In fact, the most common factor or factors that were given for food problems around the world, conflict and poor governance. So, you know, we have to keep our eye on the ball. What's the real problem going on around the world? And one thing I thought we could do is, well, let's go around the world. Let's take a look at, well, what are people around the world eating? And we'll start with this family in Chad, keeping in mind that, of course, in the poorest countries, they spend the most money on food, and so when we get a hike in food costs, it hurts them the most. So here's the Abu Bakr family in Chad, and I want you to focus on the numbers that I put in the top right corner of each of these pictures. And you can see this is This is basically what they consume in a week. This is their diet. That's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at each family's diet for a 1 week period of time. Oh, sorry, I want to stop here just to show, this is where the food riots were. I'm sure everybody has seen this graphic. Of course, we had one down here in Indonesia, and we had, of course, a food riot up here in San Francisco. That was, of course, just sympathy, I guess. But just another way of looking at where the problem is. Okay, this is a family, Namgay family in Bhutan, and you can see the food they eat. They get a little bit more here, more vegetables than the Abu Bakr family. And then look at this number here, 0.12. And here's the Aime family in Ecuador, and you can see lots of fruits. They've added some fruits, some more vegetables. And look at that number up there in the corner. This is the Ahmed family in Egypt, and look at all those fruits and vegetables. They're eating pretty well. That's a healthy diet there if you can consume enough of it. And here we have 0.61 up in the corner. By the way, in 1980, the Global 2000 study, which was an attempt to look forward, what would the food system look like in 2000, it predicted that food would cost 115% more in 2000. And actually, it cost 50% less, just to keep in mind how things move along. This is the Casales family in Mexico, and you can see, again, it just keeps growing. What's really noticeable for you corn folks, look at all that high fructose corn syrup back there. That's good stuff. And just to reinforce what Al Ambrose said at the beginning, over the past 40 years, food production has increased 20% per capita around the world. Even the poorest are eating 27% more calories today than they were 40 years ago. We go to Poland, the Sobczynski family, and again, pretty good bounty. Looks like they're eating a little healthier than the Mexican family. That's because the Mexicans are subject to us evil American influence. Look at that number up there now. It's climbed up to 1.88. Okay, the Manzo family in Italy, and very healthy, lots of fruits and vegetables. Got a little soda pop up there, good high fructose corn syrup. And 3.21 is now the number. Here's the Melander family in Germany. You know what struck me here? Look at all these liquids. Man, that's my kind of diet. A little beer there. We actually call that liquefied grain, and we keep it in a storage bin right here. By the way, another thing that everybody's focused on in the past few weeks is how much food is wasted. And what's interesting is that the same volumes of food or percentage of food just about is wasted in rich countries as poor countries. The difference is how it's wasted. You know, for the Melander family, this is pretty inexpensive, and so if some's thrown out, it's thrown out. The problem in poor countries, of course, is they can't get it out of the field, or they can't preserve it well enough, and it gets lost that way. Okay, here's the Americans, the well-fed Americans, the Rivas family, and you can see there's going to be a lot of processed food in here. Over half our income is spent on food prepared outside the home, so these boys are happily eating pizza, and we got some liquids back there, a good case of Budweiser. Look at that number up there. Okay, anybody figured out what that number represents yet? All right, here's the correlation. It's how many farm workers per hectare of land. So what we have here, what we see is that the more people you have working on a piece of land, the less food you have to eat. The big political, social crisis we have is that we have too many farmers. Not you, Joe and Julius, but as a whole, it's the issue that politicians hate to talk about. But the core